justice officer in that diocese. The diocesan secretary tells me this is proving transformational. In Canterbury, the funding from Oxford has enabled the ministry of a refugee support officer. Again, the diocesan secretary tells me this has been a fantastic good news story. Quote, "Without this support from Oxford, our frontline work with refugees would be very difficult to achieve." Friends, in the least wealthy diocese, a little extra funding goes a long way and makes significant gospel impact. Interdiocesan mutuality and generosity really does make a substantial difference. But don't forget, that glorious act of generosity from Oxford was not made out of its diocesan stipends fund, which at this moment is restricted. What this measure seeks to do is to loosen that restriction. It does not make any diocese give generously to others, but it will enable more dioceses to follow in Oxford's generous footsteps. For that reason, with good hope, I gladly commend this measure to the Synod for final approval. Thank you.
The motion at item 506 is now open for debate. I would remind members that motions for the closure, the speech limit or next business are not in order for this debate. I call Julie Ziegel, thank you. You have up to 5 minutes.
Julie Ziegel, Oxford 377. Chair, I'm a member of the steering committee for this measure. I'm a member of the Mutuality and Transparency and Finances Group, and I'm Vice Chair of Oxford Diocesan Board of Finance. I am delighted to support this short, permissive measure, the purpose of which is to enable dioceses to be generous with the income earned from their historic assets. It is a simple fact that some dioceses have far more income-earning historic assets than others, mostly for reasons rooted deep in history. In Oxford, we are very aware of our relative wealth, and it was that awareness, coupled with a sense of fairness and generosity based on the teachings of our Lord Jesus Christ, which led us to make a donation via the Archbishop's Council to other dioceses less well endowed than ourselves. We deliberately decided to do it via the Archbishop's Council because we did not want to make an imbalanced relationship with other dioceses. And I apologise if I cost the Bishop of Oxford some lunches. We decided to donate £250,000 a year for 4 years, so a total of £1 million. I very much hope and pray we will be able to make further donations, which will be easier after the passing of this measure. And please, please encourage us in Oxford by giving this measure your wholehearted support. However, it would be really sad if the only diocese to use this measure was Oxford. And actually, if you look at the historic wealth by head of population, Oxford isn't the wealthiest diocese. We are pipped to the post by both Lincoln and Coventry. So I would like to challenge the dioceses at the top quarter of this list to take a good look at their finances and see if there's any way they might be able to make use of this measure, to donate some of the income of their diocesan stipends funds to the diocese in the bottom quarter of the list. Lincoln, Coventry, Ely, Gloucester, Norwich, Peterborough and Worcester are all in the top quarter. At the end of 2020, which are the figures that we have, all of those dioceses had DSF, Diocesan Stipend Funds, assets of over £50 per person in the diocese. The bottom 4 had less than £5. Just saying. This measure is a small step towards fairer finance in our church. Please give it your enthusiastic support and please use it. Thank you.
I call Robert McNeill Wilson for his maiden speech. You still have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Robert McNeill Wilson, Diocese of Gloucester 315. This measure highlights the inadequacy of many dioceses' stipendiary funds. Also, it recognises that rebalancing of church funding is needed to address this. And Bishop Pete is certainly right that this needs addressing urgently. However, the measure has serious shortcomings, in my opinion. First, I don't see how any diocese that continues to gather parish share payments could be justified in deciding that it had money in its stipendiary fund that it did not need to be applied for a purpose specified in section 5.1. That is all of them. Second, this measure fails completely to address the root causes and the scale of the problem. Of the 40 dioceses with DSFs, 3/4 of them fail to manage these funds effectively. A similar number fail to even make any use of them at all. We must address those management deficiencies. And too many dioceses certainly have stipendiary funds that are wholly inadequate. Isolated, well-meaning gestures by dioceses, which presumably have to have stopped gathering parish share, would make negligible impact on this. We need radical rebalancing of church funds in favour of parishes. At the bottom of the DSF league table, we have a diocese with a stipendiary fund of only £500,000, which wouldn't even generate enough to support a single parish priest. There are many more dioceses with wholly inadequate stipendiary funds. Simplistically, the top 10, the Premier League dioceses of stipendiary fund holders, have between £50 million and £96 million each. As an example, transfers of just 7% or 8% of the Church Commissioner's funds to these DSFs of the remaining 30 dioceses would lift them to an average of that lower limit, that lower figure of 50 million, promoting them all to the Premier League at a stroke. Remembering, of course, that the Church Commissioner's funds were established for this purpose, the provision of parish priests. On Tuesday, Archbishop Stephen looked forward to working with the General Synod to formulate the plan to revitalise our parish system. If we took this opportunity to rebalance the Church's funding radically to address the inadequacies of all diocesan stipendiary funds in one decisive action, it can help us to arrest and reverse the relentless decline in parish priest numbers. It can help us to ensure parish priests don't have to do the equivalent of taking a vow of poverty. And it could bring an end to parishes being told that they do not justify a priest, or that on the grounds of lack of funding they need to be absorbed into a mega parish, a super ministry, or some dial-a-vicar scheme. It would lay the foundation for the revitalisation of parishes, of which Archbishop Stephen spoke on Tuesday. I'm pleased this amendment has highlighted the unnecessary deficiencies of our diocese stipendiary funds and the need for the radical rebalancing of our church funding. However, it does not go far enough, but I hope that it is a first step towards the radical rebalancing that I believe we need. I shall vote in favour of this measure.
I'm going to reduce the speech limit to 2 minutes, and I invite you, Madam, and then you, sir. Thank you.
Robert Shaw, 217 Sheffield. Thank you for calling me Chair. Just to say that I really warmly welcome this and will be voting in favour of this, and that's not because my bishop has paid me before I come here. Two things that I want to say. First of all, that one of the things that really frustrates me about the Church of England is its ability to do things 42 different ways. If we can find a way where we can start to work together and share things, that is a step, a wonderful step in the right direction to see us working together for Christ as a whole. Secondly, not entirely relevant to this, but something I feel I need to say to this synod. This morning, our chamber was packed. Where are people this afternoon? We're not a one-issue synod. Thank you.
After our next speaker, I call the gentleman at the front here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ian Johnston, 387 Portsmouth. There's an old adage about presentations that you tell the audience what you're going to tell them, you tell it, and then you tell them that you told it. I gave my maiden speech on this subject, as you will no doubt remember, in York. And then I gave a further speech a couple of days ago during the revision stage. So if there's repetition here, it is just to hammer the points in. And I take the point absolutely of the maiden speech just given. This is very generous, there is no doubt. But it is tinkering around the edges of a much, much larger problem. It is a sticking plaster. It's avoidance activity. It's doing something that we can do. And what we're not doing is sorting out the fundamental problems with our diocese, which means that things like this have to be done. It salves consciences. There is the Link programme. This gets in the way of it, I suggest. It breaks the ring fence established when the money was appropriated from the parishes in the first place, and people seem to just ignore that. Importantly, it removes any incentive to correct any problems that we've got. We need a fundamental revision of our diocese, and it's not just a matter of throwing money at them. There is a lot of money in the centre, there's a lot of money in our various dioceses. Apparently it is excessive, but that is not the solution. All that'll do is to kick the can down the road. We need a fundamental relook at how our dioceses work within them and between them. That's what's necessary. I don't have any idea that this motion is going to be lost, but I just want to remind Synod of the points that were made. Thank you.
After our next speaker, I call Andrew Dochin, and then I'll be testing your mind on a motion for closure. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Synod. Andrew Orange, Winchester, 430. Members of Synod, you'll remember, if you can remember back to Monday, it seems like a very long time ago, but of course there was an amendment to this measure which I proposed and which was not successful. I wish to explain that as a matter of integrity, I feel we've got a bit of a leaky bucket measure here, and as a matter of integrity, I feel I need to oppose it because it is a leaky bucket. At the same time, I absolutely recognise the possibilities for dioceses to be generous to each other, and it's therefore with some sadness that I will be opposing it. The thing is, dioceses think that the money they have is theirs. It isn't. It's the accumulation of money from parishes, either paid directly in the current year through parish share, or paid historically in the transfer of glebe. So this risks being a case of dioceses being generous with other people's money, not their own. But the possibility for good and sensible giving does exist. Of course it does. And that's why I wanted to have Diocesan Synod approve it each time it happened. Anyway, there it is. I've been opposing a bishop, which is obviously an extremely dangerous and unwise thing to have done. Now I just invite Synod to consider either you like this measure because of its overall provisions, or you don't like it, as I'm afraid I have to say, because of its wording and incompleteness. Thank you very much.
after Andrew Dochin, I'm told I can't order a motion for closure on this item, so Canon John Spence afterwards.
Thank you, Chair. Andrew Dochin, 208 St Edmundsbury in Ipswich. A story. When, like a prodigal child, I returned from a land far away called a Rainbow Nation to my home diocese in Suffolk, a newly ordained minister and I wanted to run a summer holiday club. We went to the PCC to say we were going to do this, and they said, "How much are you going to charge for people to come?" We said, "Nothing." They said, "You can't do this because you haven't got budget." My friend Tim and I said, "Just watch." So we paid for it out of our own stipends. And we asked people to give donations. Synod, by the end of that holiday club, we had recovered everything that we had spent and had sufficient funds to hand back to the PCC so that they now had budget for the next holiday club. Tim and I developed a hashtag, "When you give, let go." When you give, let go. Thank you, Oxford, for being a living parable. Thank you for following the parable of our Lord and the tenants in the vineyard, who at the end of the day, when those who had worked hard and long thought they should get a little bit more, our Lord said, "Are you envious because I am generous?" Synod, I wholeheartedly support this measure.
After John Spence, I call you. Thank you.
John Spence, Archbishop's Council 467. And I just wanted to recognise the frustrations I've heard from one or two people in this afternoon's debate. No, we cannot afford 42 separate head offices, all operating independently. It's not a model that can be seen in any other organisation in the country. I'm 9.5 years into my 10 as your finance chairman. The frustrations have been there throughout. Let me just reassure you, however, that there are initiatives underway. I could name at least 3 different ones where groups of regional bishops are coming together to work out how they can create shared service models where they can, instead of duplicating every service, create better. How much better it seems to me to have a property function covering 5 dioceses with a specialist team appropriately staffed than have 5 separate single people operating on their own. So we continue to work with those groups of dioceses. Andrew, I'm afraid one of the challenges is that every diocese is a charity. The origin of the funds do not remove the legal responsibilities on the trustees of that fund, and that is where we have a challenge. I will certainly offer you evidence that in some places it is the historic wealth of the diocese can compound their ability, apparently, to collect parish share. That is not universal. So the message is understood. It is nothing to stop us passing this motion, which I, as Pete knows, entirely endorse. I just want to give the reassurance. The issue is understood. We will do what we can to further incentivise and accelerate the thinking on it. But meanwhile, let's celebrate what Oxford are doing. I listened to Julie's message with great clarity. Thank you.
After the Bishop of Leeds, I'll invite the Bishop of Sheffield to respond to the debate.
Nick Baines, Leeds 22. I endorse what John Spence has just said, with one exception. For 50 years, we've been mucking about trying to get dioceses to share services and do all of that, and it doesn't work in the end. If you want a long-term solution, do a Leeds. You know, as a church, we've had the courage to have a different way of doing it, and it was hard, you know, it was challenging, but we've proven we can do it. And if you want fewer dioceses, if you want more coherence, start with what we've already done and review it and look at it and learn from it, which the Dioceses Commission expect to do in the middle of the year.
I see no one else indicating that they wish to speak. So I invite you now to respond.
I'm very grateful indeed to members of the Synod for those contributions to the debate. Thank you, Julie, for your encouragement to diocese to make use of this new provision. It would indeed be a dreadful shame if Oxford was the only example. Thank you, Robert McNeill-Wilson and Ian Johnson, for your absolutely correct assessment that this measure cannot in itself correct the enormous inequalities that exist. Thank you for reminding us of the very radical solutions that are going to be necessary if we're going to achieve a proper rebalancing. And thank you, John Spence and Bishop Nick, for your suggestions about ways in which that radical rebalancing might already be underway and might be followed through. Thank you, Eleanor, for your encouragement to us to take pleasure in the greater mutuality between dioceses that a measure like this can promote. You're right that I did not pay you before your speech, but I'm willing to buy you a coffee after it. And thank you, Andrew Orange. I'm not sure I entirely followed the analogy of the leaky bucket, but I assure you that on this occasion, the bishop in question is no danger to you at all. And thank you, Andrew Dochin, for that excellent parable and wonderful strapline, when you give, let go. Synod, I hope we can give this measure its final approval. Thank you.
I now put the question on the final approval of this motion. The question is that the measure entitled Diocesan Stipend Funds Amendment Measure be finally approved. In accordance with Standing Order 37, I order a counted vote by houses.
I'm about to ring the bell to warn members that a counted vote by houses is to take place. 2 minutes after it ceases, the vote will begin.
This is a counted vote by houses on item 506. Those present in Church House using the voting handsets and who wish to vote in favour should press 1, those against should press 2, and those who wish to record an abstention should press 3. And Those participating remotely should use the online voting platform and vote or register an abstention using the buttons on the screen. I think we've had enough practice for today, haven't we?
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. The voting period will end in 15 seconds. The voting period has now ended.
In the House of Bishops, those in favour, 26. Against, 0. Recorded abstentions, 0. The House of Clergy, those in favour, 97. Against, 1. Recorded abstentions, 3. The House of Laity, those in favour, 115. Those against, 11. And recorded abstentions, 5. The motion is carried. The Diocesan Stipends Fund amendment measure now stands committed to the Legislative Committee. That concludes this item.
Dear friends, we come to our next item, item 501 to 503, draft amending canon number 42, GS 2269A. This is the draft canon for final drafting and final approving. Who knows how much debate we're going to need, but our hope is that this is a really important piece of work, but I hope we may get through it reasonably quickly. So we have reached the final approval stage for this draft amending canon, and I'd like to call upon the chair of the steering committee, Mr. Stephen Hoffmeyer, KC, who's going to move item 502, that amending Canon number 42 be finally approved. Mr. Hoffmeyer, welcome. You may speak for up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Stephen Hoffmeyer, Guildford 320. You've already heard far too much from me in this synod, so I'll be swift. Amending Canon number 42 is a particularly important piece of legislation. You're now familiar with it. On Monday afternoon, we considered it at the third and fourth stages of the legislative process, the revision stage, Standing Order 59, and the final drafting stage, Standing Order 61. You will recall that no amendments were tabled, and the motion that paragraphs 1 to 4 stand part of the canon was carried. In this session, we're at the fifth and final stage of the legislative process, final approval, Standing Order 64, and if final approval is carried, a petition for His Majesty's Royal Assent and licence to make, promulgate and execute the canon, Standing Order 64.3. I therefore move that amending Canon 42 be finally approved. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. So item 502 is now open for debate. If I could remind members, if there is anyone who wishes to speak, that motions for closure or speech limit or next business are not in order in this debate. Is there anybody wishing to stand or speak? No. So there is therefore no need to ask Mr. Hoffmeyer to reply, and so we put item 502 to the vote. So I need to say, I think, yes. So the vote. This is a vote on final approval, and it must be counted by houses, and we're going to do it by electronic voting, please. Yeah. So I now call upon the registrar.
I'm about to ring the bell to warn members the county vote by houses is to take place. 2 minutes after it ceases, the vote will begin.
So this is a counted vote by houses on item 502. Those present at Church House using the voting handsets and who wish to vote in favour should press 1. Those against should press 2. Those who wish to record an abstention should press 3. Those participating remotely should use the online voting platform and vote or register an abstention using the buttons on the screen. The vote.
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. The voting period will end in 15 seconds. The voting period has now ended.
So the votes are as follows. In the House of Bishops, in favour 26, against 0, recorded abstentions 0. In the House of Clergy, in favour 92, against 0, recorded abstentions 4. And in the House of Laity, in favour 112, against 1, recorded abstentions 5. This is clearly carried. So with amending Canon number 42, safeguarding now having received final approval, I call upon Mr. Hofmeyr to move item 503, that the petition for His Majesty's Royal Assent and Licence, GS 2269C, be adopted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Stephen Hofmeyr, Guildford 320. It's my privilege and pleasure to move item 503, that the petition for His Majesty's Royal Assent and Licence GS 2269C be adopted.
Thank you. Is there anybody wishing to speak? In which case, I put item 503 to the vote, and in these circumstances, a show of hands will be sufficient. So if you're in favour of the petition being adopted or to go to His Majesty, please show. Are any against? Anybody want to record an abstention? That's not allowed anyway. So I'm happy to say that the petition will now be presented to the Crown. I'd also like to thank Stephen Hofmeyr and the Steering Committee for their work on this. It's really important work in our ongoing response to ICSA. So thank you, Stephen. That concludes the business for amending Canon number 42.
Good afternoon, Synod. We now move to item 12, which is the governance review. Point of order.
Prudence Daily 376 Oxford. Under Standing Order 34, I should like to propose that this item be adjourned until July.
Thank you. I'll just take some advice here. Prudence, I'm advised that you can't adjourn it until it's been opened. So, so keep your powder dry for the moment then. For this item, members will need GS 2290, also notice paper 5, which is the financial memo, as this item has a financial impact. Remember that we're on order paper 6, the one that applies to this morning. And I'm going to invite the Bishop of Guildford to speak to item 12. And Bishop, you have up to 10 minutes to do so.
Many thanks, Andrew Watson, Guildford 20. I'm not sure whether Miss Daly would like to adjourn us now. We have started the debate, but I do totally take the point that we have a very short time.
Understanding Order 34, I should like to propose the adjournment of this debate until July.
That's a second time of asking, but he needs to actually have moved it, so he needs to get to the end. So.
Fair enough.
Get there.
Sit down, Prudence, for a moment, please.
I will briefly speak to that. I mean, we're very aware that obviously this time's been hugely squeezed. The problem with adjourning it now is that we do have a lot of staff in this building and outside of it on whom this governance review does have a potential impact. And I think it's really important that we don't keep them waiting for yet more uncertainty over many months. But I totally understand the point. Synod, I did have an elegant 10-minute speech preparing for this debate, including naming all kinds of elephants in the room. A friend of mine taught me to bring elephants along with them, and I was going to do that, so I'll leave them there. But obviously the time, as we've heard, for the debate is very constrained, and we really do want to hear as much as we can from you during this time. And so directly to the question of trust, which is a question that we've often debated in this chamber, and lying behind some of the complexities of our work and contributing to its urgency has been a serious trust deficit, which is endemic in our structures, with regular talk of centre versus local and diocese versus parish and bishops versus the rest and them and us. And we've had a bit of that over the last few days too. These issues of trust are undoubtedly compounded by a national church governance structure where it really isn't clear to you or me, even as a long-standing bishop, it certainly hasn't been clear to me, just how decisions are made or who is accountable for them. Bringing greater simplicity to anything in the Church of England, though, is always a complex business. This is one of the problems with any simplification agenda. So that the interim report before you, GS 2290, includes many detailed recommendations, including plenty of uncrossed T's and undotted I's, where we would value help, either this afternoon or please do write in to the governance review at churchofengland.org for those speeches that aren't able to be taken now. And here I need to publicly thank the Synod Reference Group who've been working with us. We've met once a month or once every 6 weeks or so by Zoom for their work in challenging our thinking and helping us hone the recommendations before you today. And if anyone would like to be part of that group and isn't as yet, then please do let us know via that website. This is indeed a new way of working and one that we are better for as a result of it. Rather than focusing on the details, the big question here is just why we are undertaking this work in the first place. And the simple answer is this, that the convoluted governance structures that currently exist within our national church are frequently confusing, time-wasting, lacking in transparency, not inclusive, unaccountable, and sluggish, and are therefore liable to be bypassed just to get something done. If we were to define the role of the national church structures as being to support, serve, encourage and enable the work and mission on the ground of parishes, dioceses, schools, chaplaincies and cathedrals, then being much clearer about our governance, where decisions are made and who's accountable, will help us all. And reducing the number of national church institutions from 7 to 4 is one step along that path, alongside ensuring that each has a clearly defined role and purpose. There would be very little change to the roles of both the Church of England Pensions Board and National Society in these proposals. There would be more significant change in the work of the Church Commissioners, whose work would be focused purely on nurturing and growing the Church's historic endowment and ensuring the sustainability of distributions for today and tomorrow. And most significant of all, the so-called Church of England National Services, or SENS, the new trustee body, we'd love a new name please if anyone comes up with one, would look to enable the work and mission of the Church in all of its facets through the services provided to parishes, dioceses, cathedrals and chaplaincies. Simpler, we're aware, is not always better or more effective, but clarity must be a positive aim if we're to be confident about the transparency of our decision-making and who's accountable for what. Structural changes alone, though, are not enough. A well-designed house might help to promote good relationships among those who live in it, but certainly doesn't guarantee those relationships in and of itself. So that without a significant commitment to change the way we do our business, our culture, the best governance structure in the world will fail. Better communication and more diverse representation are two particular areas which the Project Board has been determined to tackle here, both of which should go a long way in fostering a higher culture of trust. It's these considerations that have led us to propose the creation of a SENS Nominations and Governance Committee in line with the practice of very many other charitable organisations. This isn't an attempt to take the power away from Synod or to prevent elected members from sitting on the board and its committees, but it is to recognise the need to build a truly effective and diverse trustee body which is able to navigate the many opportunities and challenges that lie our way. More work needs to be done before we can bring a legislative framework and a plan for how this vision for better governance can be implemented, and that will happen if General Synod is in a position to support the general direction we have set out today. With your backing, we could then get to work on a process of transition and give detailed considerations as to the financial implications of the recommendations. We would then bring proposals to July's Synod, properly supported with a full financial overview that we are not able to provide today. So, Synod, I commend this work to you and look forward to benefiting from your wisdom in the rather short time that we have available, but especially please do continue to feed into this process through the email address and as part of the governance reference group if you'd like to be a part of the synodical group there. On behalf of the Project Board, I'm happy to move the motion standing in my name. Thank you.
Point of order.
I think you know what I'm going to say, Mr. Chairman.
You have to say it again.
Understanding Order 34, please may I move the adjournment of this matter until July.
Prudence Daly has moved the motion that the debate be now adjourned and resumed at the next group of sessions. If the motion for the adjournment of debate is carried, the debate will be adjourned and resumed in accordance with the motion. If the motion is lost, the motion for the adjournment of debate may not be moved again except with the Chair's permission. I call on Prudence as the mover of the motion for the adjournment of debate to speak to it, followed by the mover of the main motion, the Bishop of Guildford, to reply. I'll then consider whether to allow any further debate. You have 2 minutes, Prudence, to make your case.
So there are two main reasons why I believe this ought to be adjourned. I mean, this is a matter of exceptional significance and importance for the governance of this church. First of all, we have timed business at 3:15, which gives us only half an hour, slightly less than half an hour, to discuss a matter on which there are 2 amendments on the order paper. And it just simply doesn't give us time for a proper discussion. And I understand that this is by no means the end of the process and it's coming back in July. But the fact is, if it wasn't deemed necessary to discuss it, it wouldn't be on our, at this stage and in this way, it wouldn't be on our agenda at all. And therefore, we do need enough time. And my second concern is that obviously through no fault of those involved with proposing this, it's had to be shoved in at the tag end of Synod. A lot of people have had to go home because they've got long journeys. I know people who are intending to speak on this who are no longer here. And you know, I understand that it's going to cause inconvenience, but I think we do need proper scrutiny. And I therefore would like us to be able to do it when we've got proper time in July. Thank you.
Thank you, Prudence. I call on the Bishop of Guildford to respond, and you also have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. As I said at the beginning, I fully understand the thinking behind the motion to adjourn. I think we would love to be able to spend this time just hearing some perspectives, not least to feed our work in preparation for July's Synod. So I think I would resist the request to adjourn the debate, and if we could press on, that would be very good, recognising that this will be a slightly half, this will go off at half cock, but it will be useful to us to continue.
I don't consider that the motion for the adjournment of debate needs to be debated further. I therefore put the motion to the Synod. Those in favour of the motion that the debate be now adjourned, please show. Thank you. Those against, please show. That motion is clearly lost. Therefore, we continue with the debate on the main motion. Would those who wish to speak please stand? The speech limit is, at the beginning, is 3 minutes. Rebecca Chapman, followed by you, sir.
Rebecca Chapman, for Southwark 414. Thank you for calling me, Chair. Synod, I am grateful for many things in this report, both as a member of this Synod and as someone who worked for one of the NCIs for almost a decade. I am hugely grateful for the hard work of staff here at Church House on this and for their openness to having conversations about this work. And I'm grateful that Synod will be seeing a further report prior to legislation. I'm also very grateful for the Synod reference group. Thank you all. Nonetheless, there are a few aspects of the report I would like to draw Synod's attention to as this moves forward. Synod, we have heard a lot of talk these sessions about the pastoral principles, and I think there is a real opportunity for us here to embed these principles into the life of our church governance too. Let's consider how this work structurally can bring openness and transparency to our church processes, to the deliberations and work that those in governments will be doing. How can we cast out any fear of things being done in the shadows and instead bring confidence and trust to our processes again? What can be done to structurally embed the ability of staff at all levels to expose hypocrisy, to acknowledge prejudice, and to bring integrity and respect? I was thrilled to see in this report the intention to create a culture where people are willing to speak up, to speak into silence, and to know that decisive action will be taken. It's really needed and really important. As has been mentioned multiple times this session, let us pay attention to power in these new structures. The makeup of the powerful nominations committee here remains unclear. Let us remember that power can be direct and indirect. It's not just about who's there, but how they got to be there and to whom they are ultimately responsible and accountable. There are already huge time pressures on our bishops, and I'm very aware this proposes 4 members of our House of Bishops, including both our archbishops, with what will likely be a huge government remit, and yet more meetings. The report is clear that it's a work in progress, and time pressures today mean there is so much more that we could discuss from this and likely won't, on the important role of bishops, on the role of ourselves as a synod, and lots more. Please, Synod, have a look at this report for yourself, maybe not on a train home, we'll have had enough, but later, and feed into this vital and ongoing work. Thank you.
Nigel Bacon, followed by Pete Spears.
Nigel Bacon, Lincoln 342. Thank you, Chair, for calling me. With a background in business governance and now closely involved in diocesan governance, I very much welcome this review and agree with much of its direction, which should lead, properly implemented, to a far more effective, efficient operation and with better governance. Having said that, there are 3 areas which I would suggest require some further attention. Firstly, with the review having looked at the status quo and proposed structural changes, estimates should be made of the cost of change, the time that will be required to put the changes into effect, and the quantifiable benefits that will emerge. Only by doing so will we be able to confirm, as I fully expect it will, that it is worth pursuing the changes, and also secure some measures against which we can evaluate the change management programme as it progresses. You may be able to tell that I am also an experienced project manager. The second area is the structure of SENS, where the balance of 2 ex officio, 6 elected, and 7 nominated positions strikes me from a governance accountability perspective as being too weighted towards the nominated positions. I fully agree that the overall membership size should be limited, and so personally would advocate cutting the number of nominated positions to 5. To allow the SENS board to have access to the full range of expertise, I would suggest allowing subject matter experts to attend meetings as necessary, though without voting rights. Finally, and at a far more detailed level, I think it is generally unhelpful and inefficient that the bishop's office in diocese is run entirely separately from the diocesan office, and would encourage the governance review group to look at this aspect. Thank you.
Pete Spears, and then I'm going to begin looking at the amendments. Pete Spears, thank you.
Thank you very much for calling me. Pete Spears, Liverpool 154. I'm also speaking as chair of the Appointments Committee, which you elected me to last year. And you'll notice that there's been some discussion in this document. I'm looking at paragraph 96 in particular, between the overlap of the Appointments Committee and the Nominations and Governance Committee. We had a very constructive meeting back in November with Stephanie Harrison, I think it was, from discussing with us how we could work together. And it was a useful exchange of views. And I just want to say, first of all, that we'll continue to happily engage in that particular process. I would draw your attention to the fact that, as far as I know, the Synodical Reference Group, the Appointments Committee were not asked to appoint members to that. So they seem to have been a group of volunteers. I'm not necessarily against that, but that seems to perhaps point out the confusion that can be sometimes happen in these processes. My other general point is that we still have a vacancy on the bishops, on the Appointments Committee for a bishop. We would love to have one of you serve on this really important committee where we make our decisions about who would be good representatives. So you can have a word with me at the end of this debate. Thank you.
So we move to item 69, the amendment standing in the name of Robert Zampetti. I invite Robert to speak to and move his amendment. Should you need it, you have up to 5 minutes, Robert.
With your permission, I'd like to actually speak to both this amendment and the 71, I believe it is, together.
Well, you can do, but we might not get
I will
to
move
that
them
one.
separately.
Yeah.
I will move them, right? Okay. Let me start by declaring an interest. I was a member of, and am a member, I guess it's not past tense, of the reference group for this work. And let me also begin by expressing my deep appreciation for the staff who are managing the project very well, for all their hard work, and especially for their patience. We're not an easy group to deal with. We have very strong opinions. The fact that I propose in this first amendment Replacing welcome and take note is not meant in any way to disparage their work. It is a recognition that we are not yet in the stage in what I consider the proposed timeline where a welcome is actually needed. And that word welcome is a hot button issue for many. This is only a year. I'm new to the Synod. Well, I'm a year old. But I've already heard from many Synod members that in the past they feel that that word welcome has been used to lay claim to a fuller endorsement of the contents of a preliminary report that in fact didn't really exist. And so I think it gets back to the matter of trust that was alluded to earlier. And so I'd rather I'm recommending we just remove that. It's not meant to be negative or positive. We'll take note and we'll get the work done. Now, I don't want to go, I was tempted to give a long speech and talk about all 3 paragraphs. But we're already hearing from many of you the same concerns that my amendments attempt to address. And by address, I mean simply say, as you continue your work, Project Board, please make sure that you're looking at these things. I would understand that many of the members of the Synod have not had time to read carefully the 47 pages. Like Rebecca, I highly recommend that you do so because the vast majority of those recommendations I think are sensible and sorely needed. And we probably need to do them sooner rather than later for the fairness of the people working in those institutions who are living with a lot of uncertainty. So I just wanted to point all of that out. Now, the second amendment, 71, makes 3 additions. I've alluded to those. They only are there to highlight concerns that the report itself already acknowledges. So those concerns are already there. It lists various options and makes a recommendation of a particular option in some cases. And these are my 3. Why am I calling them out if they're already there? It's just so that the Synod can have that communication back to the Project Board officially about having them look at the restructuring of the group of NCIs and what that then means for the role of Synod. Look at the composition of the SENS board and frankly the nominations committee and other key committees of which we've already heard people speaking. And then thirdly on the appellate function that's now exercised by the Mission, Pastoral, and Church Property Committee, which is of such concern to so many, including many of our parishes. Now I think that with or without the adoption of these amendments, the Project Board will continue to be open, I hope, to working with the reference group and others to explore the best ways of addressing these concerns. But I don't want them to be limited only to the options that they have in the report. There are other options, and we've heard a few just moments ago. And this is also a chance, frankly, for the Project Board and for Bishop Andrew to demonstrate that trust of Synod, that you trust us that we're not here to undermine or derail what is a needed reform measure. And at the same time, by doing so, you'll make it clear that there isn't a nefarious deep state strategy involved. I'll let others speak to the rest of it.
Thank you very much. I call Bishop Andrew to respond. Could you confirm, sorry, that you are moving?
And for those reasons, I move the amendment.
Is this amendment 69 just?
Just 69, and you have up to 5 minutes, but please don't use it.
Robert, thank you very much. We do really value your presence on the Synod Reference Group and have been listening very hard to what you and others have had to say. I mean, I think we're not going to quibble about welcome and take note. Not too bothered. I don't think I'll lose sleep about that. And so I wouldn't really want to take up a great length of time. So I'm very happy to leave that up to Synod to decide whether you want to welcome or take note. And we'd like to hear more contributions, please.
So this item is now open for debate. The prolocutor.
Luke Miller, 163 London.
You have, you have up to 3 minutes.
Thank you. I won't need 3 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Just to say very quickly, a thank you to Bishop Andrew Stephanie and the team for all the work that they've done. I support this amendment because it will enable the work to continue with a lot of support from those who may have hesitations about welcoming, as Robert says. In paragraph 14 of the report, the phrase is the church is described as to be not so much an organisation as an organism. I've used a phrase that we're less a charity than a polity, and it seems to me that therefore our governance ends up being slightly different. That can be very frustrating, but it also it opens opportunity. It needs more work, but the work is well worth doing. We do have a clear charitable aim on one level, but it's rich and full and contains many areas about which we have many all kinds of debates. Pete Spears has already mentioned I am a member of the Appointments Committee, but that's sort of by mistake. The relationship specifically between the Nominations Committee and the Appointments Committee, the proposed Nominations Committee, will be important. But I would support this amendment for those reasons.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Sam Wilson, Chester 282. I'm emotionally hungover after the LLF debate, so apologies. I'm sure we're all feeling pretty similar. Synod, I wonder, what is the point of Synod, to be blunt? Why are we elected? Why are we here? Why do we have these debates? Are we here to debate what words we use, every single word, every single time? I realise both times I have risen to speak this week, it has been about whether or not we welcome a report or take note of it. We seem to keep doing this. Does it matter, honestly? I think what really matters is the detail of the report. I would much rather we were spending time talking about that report. There's a lot of interesting stuff in it. I've definitely got concerns about it, but I would much rather that we encourage each other to go and to speak to the people who are Bishop Andrew and the staff that are helping make this work, rather than what often seems like playing politics with words. Trust works both ways, and if we're going to trust those that bring things to us, they need to trust that we're going to treat them respectfully and not waste their time. So can we reject this? Because it's a waste of time, personally. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Luke Appleton, Exeter 309. I support the amendment. I promise, Sam, I don't just disagree with everything that you say. I support the amendment because I think governance is something that when I talk to people back home, there's not a great amount of familiarity. They just tend to think about either LLF or things like that. But when I go into detail with them, they then raise concerns. And I think the problem with welcome rather than take note is it implies a direction of travel. And so hopefully take note is a bit more balanced. Hopefully it's not quibbling over words. It's just a bit more sober-minded. Thank you very much.
I see no one standing, and so I put item 69 to the Synod. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. All those against, please show. I think we're going to have an electronic count of that one, but we know how to do it, folk. Point of order.
Graham Hamilton, Exeter 119. Chair, we weren't quite clear at the back whether we were voting on a motion for closure or actually on the item. Could you clarify, please? Thank you.
We're voting on the item because nobody was standing to speak. So we're voting on item 69 and this is a counted vote of the whole Synod on item 69, the amendment 69. Those present at Church House using the voting handsets, and who wish to vote in favour should press 1. Those against should press 2. Those who wish to record an abstention should press 3. Those participating remotely should use the online voting platform and vote or register an abstention using the buttons on the screen.
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. The voting period will end in 15 seconds. The voting period is now ended.
There voted in favour 107, against 124, with 27 recorded abstentions, and so the amendment was lost. Now, Synod, as we have timed business at 3:15, I am now going to, this debate will now stand adjourned, and under the point of order, Archbishop of Canterbury.
This point of order, you'll probably say, is not entirely a point of order.
Try me.
It is true, I believe, that this is the last time that you will chair a "Don't you dare touch that button."
No, it's just you're not speaking the truth, because I'm doing safeguarding after this.
Oh, I was told you were doing this as your last.
Please resume your seat. This is what the Elizabethan settlement is all about. Anyway, as I was saying, it's up to the Business Committee then to bring this item back, item of business back to a future group of sessions. Thank you.
Point of order.
Point of order.
SCO in London 358. We have got this very important timed business now. I don't know how long it's going to take, but if it finishes with a reasonable amount of time, I wonder if we might then resume this debate rather than proceeding with whatever was next, which I think was the Dars and Synod motion.
Thank you for the suggestion, Mr. Scowen. That is up to the Business Committee, not up to me. Thank you.
Matter for Synod, surely.
But I'm sure they've heard it. Thank you, Synod. We now move to items 13 and 14, safeguarding. Members will need GS 2293 and GS MISC 1335 for these items, please. And we're going to begin with a presentation before we then move on to the take note debate. And so I invite the Bishop of Rochester to introduce the presentation.
Chair, thank you very much indeed. Jonathan Gibbs, Bishop of Rochester 33. I will say no more than that I am delighted to welcome our new National Director of Safeguarding, Alex Kabenji. I'd like Synod to give him a warm welcome as he's settling into his new role. This will be his first presentation to Synod. Alex, thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for such a warm welcome. Many of you would have seen my report to General Synod on my observations from being the National Director of Safeguarding for almost 6 months. I would like to start by apologising and clearing up any misunderstanding or confusion. My report refers to issues around safety, relationships, and miscommunication. I want to say that my intention was not to upset or cause harm by the comments I made in the report. And I have since been in contact with lots of people and apologized since then. My intention was to highlight an issue. I would like to go on the record by saying there are many victims, survivors, and advocates who have campaigned tirelessly and have worked with the Church to change safeguarding. Without their input and dedication, the changes we have seen in safeguarding would not have been possible. And for this, they must be commended. The Church has failed in its safeguarding responsibilities, leaving many people feeling a sense of betrayal, loss, trauma, and injustice. I've had the opportunity to meet with many survivors, victims, advocates on several occasions, and I will continue to do so, as I made a promise to victims and survivors in November last year within the first open forum we held. Hearing their stories and experiences was saddening. I did, however, leave with a sense of hope that they truly wanted to help the Church to change and that we could work in partnership to achieve our common goals. And for this, I am grateful and want to say thank you to all individual victims and survivors, as well as survivor groups and organizations who are engaging with us on this path to improvement. We would also like to hear from young people and families and understand their current experiences of feeling safe within the Church. As a social worker who has worked in child protection for many years, and I've had to make life-changing decisions, I understand the trauma these decisions may have on children and families. Trauma can manifest itself in many ways, and as a Church, we have a responsibility to survivors and victims, as caring for vulnerable people is at the heart of the Christian message. I know this personally from my own involvement in my local church and for being a member of the PCC for many years. The Church also has a responsibility to protect staff in order for them to continue to offer survivors and victims support. As the National Director, the point I was trying to make was that I believe the church needs to be safer for all, and we need to find a way to address and prevent issues that cause harm to people. As a church, we do have the best intentions with regards to putting things in place. However, we do not always take into consideration the complexity and length of time it may take to implement. These delays will understandably cause frustration to victims and survivors, and this needs to be handled with care and compassion. My plea today to everyone is that we need to find a better way to build relationships and improve our communication. Otherwise, the trauma cycle will continue and cause further damage to all involved. Using a trauma-informed, restorative practice approach may be beneficial if we follow the following set of principles: empowerment, honesty and transparency, respect, engagement, healing, personal accountability, inclusiveness, collaboration, and problem solving. Everyone should be treated with empathy, compassion, and respect at all times. I've seen a lot of good work within the church. Safeguarding is improving. However, we have to remember this work started from a low base. In the last few years, we have started to see the fruits of this work. But it must be noted that we still have a lot more work to do. We want more victims and survivors to join us to help shape the changes that are very much needed to make the church a safer place for all. We are certainly not there yet and still have some way to go. This is why it is imperative that we get the independent scrutiny right to assist in raising safeguarding practices and policies. This sense of scrutiny will also give confidence. Remember, we were criticized at the ICSA, and we were told we should not be marking our own homework. There has been some discussion on the issue of independence in safeguarding in the past week, and I would like to underline the point I made in my paper. The church has a vision that safeguarding should have independent scrutiny, which in itself is a good concept and one that I endorse. And if it is done properly, will help to raise the standards in safeguarding. That is very much wanted and can also highlight areas of strengths that can be built on. Policies and processes are not always clear, and there is a need for a better understanding of roles and responsibilities through training, for instance, and better communication. As a national safeguarding team, we are working on this with our diocesan colleagues. As you can see in the NST update report, there are a number of work streams that highlight the ongoing work. I know Bishop Jonathan will touch on this later. However, I would be willing to answer any questions you may have on the safeguarding program, if that is seen as helpful. Synod, I look forward to working with you as our safeguarding work develops, always remembering that the voice of survivors and victims is the core to what we do.
Thank you. As Alex just said, we're now open for questions. We're going to take them in groups of 3. And remember, they need to be questions rather than speeches. Martin Sewell.
Narrow is the way that leads to the microphone.
Martin Sewell, Rochester 390, model citizen. Alex, first of all, welcome. And from the heart, thank you for that apology for a misstep. If the church had only had so much integrity and been so gracious in the past, we would not be in the place that we are now. But from the conversations you and I have had, I believe that we're very much on the same page because we come from the same secular safeguarding culture, which is well established, free from controversy over conflicts of interests, fully functional, totally Human Rights Act compliance. So I wonder if I could invite you to share with Synod your initial observations on what it's been like for you moving from that world and encountering the world of church safeguarding.
Thank you. Are there any more questions at the moment? Penny.
Thank you. Penny Allen, Lichfield 335. I wonder if there is any indication yet. I feel quite concerned about the National Redress Scheme that was proposed by ICSA to cope with redress. I'm looking at 1414. And is there any indication from the government about the timing of this and when it will be ready? Because I feel this is an ICSA recommendation which we would be well advised to look at if the timing is suitable for our implementation. It concerns me to see that there is no indication from the government, but if it's going to happen in the next few months, it might be well worth our while engaging with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I've got three very quick questions, if I may. You said you were taking them in three. You didn't specify three.
I meant three people, not each three.
Before the questions, can I just welcome Alexander to his new role and echo Martin's thanks for that apology. And I also want to thank Bishop Jonathan for his work as he prepares to step down as lead bishop. Members of the Synod will know from not clashes, but engagements, exchanges between us that we don't agree on the journey or the route, but I'm convinced that we both want the same destination. I want to thank Bishop Jonathan for the work that he's done as lead bishop. The first question is to Alexander, and you've part answered this, but I was disturbed to read about the death threats received by staff, and I think it would be useful, can we have a reassurance that they've been reported to the police to ensure staff are protected? But I am concerned about talk about abuse, bullying, harassment, and if that's happened, that should also be condemned. But I just think we need some reassurance that all robust criticism of ongoing safeguarding failures is not classed as abuse. As a way of avoiding dealing with those. Second question is a quick one. Amending Canon 42 received final approval and will go for royal assent, and your report details the work by the NST around this. Do you have an idea when we can expect to see the draft regulations that will give the new DSOs power, an authority rather than just a new job title? And finally, we heard from the ISB that they wanted to report to us this week and were only offered a fringe meeting. And it would be helpful, I think, if we could find out if the NST lead bishop or NSSG made any representations to the business committee about this, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Over to you.
Thank you. So the first response is to Martin. So local authorities have been doing safeguarding for quite some time. And it's governed by, the Children Act, working together. There's lots of judicial kind of processes that we follow if needed to safeguard and protect children. I think the difference here is about consistency in practice and the independent scrutiny element. So in a local authority, we have Ofsted that will come in and review standards and practice. I think we are very much on a journey. So the regional model that we are piloting at the moment should hopefully give an element of consistency. I think the other bit that is really important is the independent scrutiny element of it. And I guess the final bit is around when we're working in particular areas, it's about having the right expertise or being able to commission that expertise to be able to have that. I think the last point for me is that obviously the church, I heard it from a colleague, that the church is, it has features of an organization, but it's, but it's more like a community in that sense. So it's very complex at times to be able to navigate areas, but it's a big thing. The church is all over the country, and it's a very big, I'm not going to say it's in that way, but it's a very complicated thing to navigate if you're new around it. So I hope that addresses that question. The second question I do believe is to, is it Penny? No, we haven't heard anything back from the government yet. But one good thing about the church is that we decided to go ahead with our own redress scheme in any event. So we haven't heard from the government, but we are pressing ahead with our own redress. When we talk, I think the next one is Gavin. So when we're talking about abuse and bullying, I just want to be clear that that's not acceptable, and it will not be acceptable. I understand there is a difference when someone is going through trauma and they've heard something that potentially makes them upset, and they might be going through a process. I get that, and I accept that. Trauma manifests in different ways. But the bullying and harassment element of it is not something that anyone really should be tolerating. When we talk about threats, in a sense, I think Gavin was saying, we have dealt with the issues that we need to deal with, and if any threats of any nature like that happens again, we will do, again, what we feel is appropriate to do. It will be inappropriate for me to go into individual cases or situations. The other point, I think, was around, I think it was the DSOs to DSAs element. So that element of work is still going on. I think we're literally almost there. So hopefully in the near future, those changes will happen soon. I think I've answered that first set of questions, unless I've missed something. Is that fine?
Thank you. Any more questions? Robert, thank you. Oh, and then Judith Maltby, who's on Zoom.
Thank you, Chair. Robert Thompson, London 166. In this morning's LLF debate, Judith Maltby's contribution drew a connection between sexuality and safeguarding. And certainly in my own experience of the way in which that's dealt with in the Diocese of London, which I serve, it has not been up to the same standards as in the other contexts in which I previously worked in the NHS and in a local authority and as a school governor. I'd like to ask Alex, therefore, what in what way is he going to get his team to look at those issues? For example, the first area that I would raise is about training. The training which we do in the Diocese of London doesn't in any way address any protected characteristics in equalities legislation, and yet research shows that all of those protected characteristics have greater safeguarding risks. The second is in relation to support and advocacy. So, for example, I supported someone in my deanery who came out in another parish in the deanery as a lesbian.
Can you make it a bit quicker, please?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So about support and advocacy, and also about the whole issue of prayer ministry and what is and is not appropriate in prayer ministry.
Thank you.
Michaela Suckling, Sheffield 411. Alex, thank you for the work you've already done. I'm sure lots in this chamber have received Martin Newell's email expressing the concerns from one of the survivor groups. I'm not sure if this is the right place to answer the question, to ask the question. Alex, I'm really, really encouraged that you understand trauma, and I thank you that you, when you see bullying and intimidation, that kind of thing, you call it out, but you also recognise that that may be part of the process of someone working through their own trauma. My question is in relation to Martin's email. He says that the redress scheme is now only looking at monetary, kind of making that better with money. I wonder why there's no therapy in there when we know that that can work in terms of helping people work through their trauma. I'd be really interested to hear your answer around that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Judith Maltby on Zoom.
University's TEIs 452. Thank you, and welcome, Alex, to this very difficult role and coming into the lion's den here a bit. My question follows on from Robert's question and the point I made in the LLF debate this morning, is when we have these major reports, like Robson on Griffin and material from ICSA, but what is the process for learning and absorbing from those reports by the NST? Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. My first response is to Rob. Rob, thank you for what you have said. I think I'm not trying to get a cop out here, but what I will do is go back with the team and look at what you've just said to me. If I have your information, then I can respond to you with what it is we're going to be doing about some of the things that you've just raised, if that's okay. The other one is for, is it Michaela? It's around redress and the elements around therapy, etc. We are going to have non-financial redress, which looks at therapy. So we are going to have therapeutic offers. So it's part of the plan. So I think maybe there's a miscommunication somewhere with that. Judith, with regards to your question, we have a lot of, we have plans, we have a lot of meetings with other people, we're starting to do audit activity, we're trying to triangulate and close the loop. We know we still need to work on our quality assurance element, but we do take the recommendations seriously, and some of those recommendations have actually moved along quite well.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for responding to the questions like that. And I hope I can speak on behalf of Synod to say that you and your team are in our prayers as you continue that work. Synod, we're now going to move forward to item 14 on the order paper, that this Synod do take note of this report, and I invite the Bishop of Rochester to speak to item 14, and you have up to 10 minutes in order to do so.
Chair, thank you. Jonathan Gibbs, Rochester 33. Well, once again, good afternoon, Synod. As you may be aware from some of the contributions made already, I will shortly be stepping down as lead bishop for safeguarding, and I hope you'll allow me a few moments to reflect on my 3 years in this role, as well as to address the issues covered in the NST reports before you. I'd also like to begin by thanking Alex Kubenji for his presentation and answers to questions, and to express my support for him and the work he and the team are doing. More about that in a few moments. I accepted this role 3 years ago because I felt a deep sense of call to play my part in strengthening the Church's safeguarding work, and especially our response to victims and survivors. That sense of call arose out of my own experience of coming to terms with childhood trauma and of working with vulnerable families as chair of the family support charity Home Start in Wirral in Merseyside. I came into post a few months before the publication of ICSA's report into the Anglican Church, published in October 2020. And that report has set much of the agenda for our work over the following years. The report and the inquiry leading up to it was a powerful reminder of the Church's failures, especially in our response to victims and survivors. And the work streams outlined in the NST update give details of how we are seeking to address the recommendations of the ICSA report. The first section of GS 2293 outlines the safeguarding programme, which comprises 5 key elements of our response to ICSA. They relate to the National Redress Scheme, the change from DSA to DSO, and the introduction of professional supervision and quality assurance of diocesan safeguarding teams, information sharing with other partner organisations, a national safeguarding casework management system, and a second past cases review scheme. Other items in the update refer to the interim support scheme, the learning and development programme, the safeguarding code of practice measure, and our initial response to ICSA's final report on religious institutions, along with engagement with survivors, the Safe Spaces Service, and learning lessons reviews. Synod, I think you will agree that all this constitutes a huge programme of work, and I'd like to express my appreciation to everyone who is working so hard to deliver this programme, including staff colleagues in the NST and dioceses, as well as countless clergy and lay people up and down the country, and most importantly, those victims and survivors who have helped to shape this work and who continue in various ways to challenge us to do things better. Most of this work goes on behind the scenes and below the radar. What we hear about most often, quite understandably, are the things that go wrong, or where someone is not satisfied with what the Church has done or with our response to them. Now, it goes without saying that we have to be committed to resolving these issues as far and as quickly as we can for the sake of all concerned. That is in everyone's interests. But one of the things I would like to reflect on for a moment is why this sometimes proves so difficult, particularly for the Church, and I believe this is precisely because we are the Church of Jesus Christ. The essence of the Church is that we are meant to be a sacred space that is safe for all. When that goes wrong, especially when people do awful things to children and vulnerable people, then there is a deep sense of betrayal as well as of pain and trauma. There is a breach of trust, which it is very hard and sometimes impossible to repair. And that explains in part why even what we do to try to address what has happened can itself be met with suspicion and even hostility. I think what Alex has been seeking to do is to highlight and name that context, not to blame individuals. And that context is something we all need to reflect on. Of course, when you look at how the Church has often responded to victims and survivors, as reported, for instance, by ICSA and other reviews, then that sense of suspicion and hostility is hardly surprising. But that doesn't mean we should not go on trying to do things better and to get things right in the future. We are currently living through the aftershocks of ICSA and other harrowing reports into abuse perpetrated within the church and our failure to respond as we should have done. And our response to this situation has to be many-sided. It has to include redress and support for victims and survivors, including but not limited to financial compensation through the redress scheme which is under development. Now, Synod, it is a matter of deep regret to me that this is taking far longer than I had hoped and anticipated when I spoke about it in this very chamber 3 years ago. I now understand much more about the complexity of what is involved, and I believe that all those working on this are doing everything they can to get this done and to get it right. But I would also urge Synod to keep pushing to bring the scheme into operation as soon as possible, even if that means, dare I say, that some of the elements, such as how exactly the principle of subsidiarity mentioned in the report is enacted, even if those things may have to come a little later. At the same time, as we all know, there remain challenges around how the Church can best ensure effective external scrutiny of its safeguarding work. The Archbishop's Council set up the Independent Safeguarding Board to begin this work and to help us to think through what would be required in the longer term. As you will be aware, we are currently seeking to address some issues about which it would not be appropriate to say more at this stage, but we look forward to working with the ISB to find a way forward as soon as possible. Having said that, and acknowledging the difficulties, I would encourage Synod not to lose sight of the crucial work that is outlined in the report that you have in front of you. This represents a sea change in the Church's safeguarding work over the last few years. And it is mirrored in the fantastic work being done in our dioceses, our cathedrals, parishes, and other church settings up and down the country. I want to record my thanks to everyone who is working so hard to make our churches safe, healthy, and nurturing places for all. In closing, I'd just like to say 2 more things very briefly. Firstly, I want to acknowledge that the changes we have made over the last few years have undoubtedly placed greater expectations on clergy and parishes at a time when we're all facing the impact of the pandemic and now the cost of living crisis. We understand that, and the NST and the NSSG are committed to working with you to help address your concerns. Keep talking with us. Finally, I want to end with a plea for us to keep working together in the Church of England towards creating an ever healthier and safer culture for all, understanding the impact of abuse and trauma, learning from victims and survivors, seeking to find ways of responding with greater insight and care, honoring and protecting one another, and recognizing that for all our failings, we are committed to enabling our churches to embody the justice, compassion, mercy, and grace of the kingdom of God. Thank you for allowing me the privilege of undertaking this role over the last 3 years. Please give your support to my successor. She's quietly sitting up in the gallery over there. And to all my colleagues in the years to come. I am pleased to commend to you this update from the National Safeguarding Team. Thank you.
As we begin the debate on item 14, can I remind you that amendments to the motion are not in order in this debate, and I call first of all on the Archbishop of Canterbury, and then I'll come to the rest. You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to raise two things, which in a sense, I think, speak to the object of this debate. But the first of all is, they're both thank yous, but the first one is to thank Jonathan Gibbs. It is an extraordinarily painful and difficult task to be the lead bishop for safeguarding. For obvious and fully understandable reasons, the bishops, archbishops, especially Canterbury, but the bishop in charge of safeguarding starts invariably with a deficit of trust. It's just the way it works. And those who've held that position, which they hold for a maximum of 3 years because the strain is so huge, have to face that deficit of trust, which comes from trauma, as Alex said earlier, and deal with it in themselves and address it with those who express it. And that is not a criticism of those who express it at all. They usually come with very, very good reasons for not trusting the church. So to take on that role is a huge, huge thing. And I am hugely grateful to Jonathan for doing so. And I hope at the end of what I say that the Synod will express that very clearly. The second thing is to say thank you to Alex for his presentation, for his transparency. It was very good that he apologized for what he classed as a mistake, an error. I do think we also need to bear in mind that staff in the NST, particularly junior staff, particularly junior and clerical staff, do need our protection. There is no reason why they should have death threats or be screamed at. It's wrong. Two wrongs don't make a right. And so Alex has come in. He has, again, a deficit of trust to deal with. He has to get to know this very strange institution. And he also has to move forward on critical areas around independent oversight, as ICSA required, quite rightly. And so I want to thank him for taking that on and being very honest with us. And Alex, it's hugely appreciated. It just confirms how glad we are to have you in post. And then, completely off subject, which the chair will not interrupt with, because if he does, I'll simply ignore him. I can confirm this time that it is, in fact, your last session as chair. Right, you're sure? You're not going to change your mind? Right. Andrew has been chairing Synod for as long as I can remember, which is only 11 years, but it feels like eternity. Has always been one of the best and most reliable, sensitive, insightful and wonderful chairs, as well as an extraordinary Dean of Southwark, and a million other things. I'm not going to do a farewell speech, but I just wanted to say to you, for this role of often chairing the most difficult sessions and the most sensitive sessions in Synod, which we always know we can trust you with absolutely and totally, pastorally, theologically, politically, in every possible way, may I say thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, that's very kind. Anyway, we've got a debate to have. So I now call on a gentleman with the green lanyard there, and another green lanyard just standing there. Thank you. And the speech limit is 3 minutes, if you don't mind.
Mark Bennett, Oxford 184. In my life before ordination, I was a chartered accountant working for a leading firm of lawyers on personal injury damages claims, many of which took years to settle. I know what that does to people's lives, including the constant need to retell their past stories over years of delay to the detriment of their futures. I became something of an expert on the subject. That was now 25 years ago, but the experience still informs my ministry today. The fact that we have moved so slowly on redress should shock and shame us. What I read about the complexity of the redress scheme now proposed and its delivery looks under-resourced, understaffed, under-financed, under-supported by institutional will, and therefore almost inevitably further delayed. We need to do better. We cannot afford to inflict a complex system on survivors. They need a simple interface with our complex organisation. The proposals for where redress lands, close to the source of damage, that apparently empowering word subsidiarity also concerns me. As a parish priest, I had to deal with two major safeguarding issues in my first year in my current post. I observe that you are asking people and communities who are themselves feeling shocked and betrayed, who are partly in denial and maybe deeply divided, to have effective agency, dynamics highlighted by the bishop on the national scale. Sorry, it simply will not do. Though I am grateful for all and any progress on safeguarding, I cannot vote, therefore, to take note of this report, and I urge you to vote against it to signal your concern about this lack of progress. Thank you, Synod.
Peter Adams, followed by Clive Billiness.
Peter Adams, St Albans 392. Thank you, Bishop Jonathan, for your words, and thank you for your service in this role. And thank you, Alex, for your report. I was making my way to a consecration of our new suffragan bishop last Thursday, which was in Canterbury, and took the time to meet with one of our survivors of one of the large cases that we deal with. I had a grueling 3 hours as I experienced once again the pain and the trauma that he had encountered over many years. It was quite a strong counterpoint to go and sit and hear new bishops making the vows they make. Vows that include, as we heard this morning, a commitment to use their authority to heal and not to hurt. And I believe those things. I work closely with a number of bishops, and bishops, you're good people. But something has gone wrong in our midst. We now have one new opportunity, particularly, as we bring new diocesan safeguarding officers into place. There is obviously a strong accountability up to the national level of work. Can we try and create at every diocesan level a very close working relationship that avoids ideas of deference and so on that have been there in the past and for which ICSA has challenged us? Can we try and create good dynamic working relationships at a diocesan level with those officers as well as with the national, so that we really hear, we really get, we really experience? We can create a new culture. Alex's team can help us create new cultures at our diocesan level. Alex highlighted the need for us not to mark our own homework. I was talking to somebody who's publishing a book in 6 weeks' time, just a few days ago, based on the interviews of 400 people who've left the church. Extensive surveys and then interviews of 100. 12.5% left the church, and not just the Church of England, I hasten to add, because of abuse experienced. A further 11.2 left because of abuse of a friend or colleague. I leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Clive Billinus, followed by James Carey.
Thank you, Chair. Clive Billinus, 306, Diocese in Europe. I wanted to start by also thanking Bishop Jonathan, and I hope your next job will be less stressful, perhaps something like lion taming or crocodile wrestling, or something of a less stressful nature than safeguarding. Also to say to Alex, thank you and welcome. I also want to thank you for recognising that bullying is a major issue in the role of safeguarding. And I would ask you to look at the private member's motion being put forward by the Archdeacon of Blackburn to bring in legislation to prevent the bullying of clergy by lay officers. My item for the Bishop this afternoon, it's a small item, and it is with the regional model and the quality assurance framework that's being put in. You're going to have it externally audited. I would just like to be certain that you're going to have the actual framework before you put it out to contract externally validated, because auditors work from an issues versus investigations framework, and they will require to have that framework established before they can tender to do it. So I would like just to be assured it is going to be looked at externally before it is put out to tender. Thank you.
James Carey.
James Carey, 246 Bath and Wells, 246 Bath and Wells, sorry about that. Full disclosure, I'm one of the 2 representatives of the House of Laity on the Archbishop's Council and one of the 2 representatives of the Archbishop's Council on the National Safeguarding and Steering Group. Ask for a diagram at the help desk if you would like. All of the above means that I have a front row seat to see the incredible work being done at speed by the safeguarding team. It's hard work, it's never done. The meetings, the ones I'm in at least, are long. The papers are excellent, thank you staff. And mistakes are made, have been made, cannot be unmade, and that has been acknowledged. But for me, it's a joy to engage with the safeguarding work because our first objective as the Archbishop's Council is the doubling of the number of children and young people in our churches. Wouldn't that be amazing? And we can do that under God. In fact, the highlight of this synod for me was 20 minutes spent in prayer at lunchtime on Tuesday. And there were some bishops here, Archbishop Stephen was here, and some members of the laity. It was brilliant. It was brilliant. We were praying together for the work of the children and young people who are not just church future, but church now. So it's vital that our churches are places where children can enjoy the safety so lacking in the world around them. I recently saw a video about some youth work going on, and a young boy said, and it's hard not to cry as I say this, that he loved church because it was the only place where he wasn't bullied. Praise God for that church and many like it, commending the love of Christ in such a practical and safe way. That's why we do this. Now, this means a few things. One is do the training and do it with joy. Not because you have to, but because you might be instrumental in preventing the abuse of a child. That'd be good, wouldn't it? Do the training with joy. Secondly, if we're serious about unity and walking together, insisting that a particular view of human sexuality is in itself a safeguarding issue is really unhelpful. Can we not do that, please? And thirdly, please take note of this report. Thank you, Synod.
The Bishop of Truro, followed by Penny Allen.
Thank you very much, Philip Mount Stephen, 041 Truro. I wasn't planning to speak, but I want to because I chair the redress board and I'm honoured to do it. I've done so for around a year now. We have a very clear commitment to produce a thorough, robust scheme in as timely a manner as we can. We have no desire to short-circuit the very necessary, complex work that needs to go on, but we have absolutely no desire to take any more time in establishing the redress scheme than it evidently needs. We are committed to co-create the scheme with survivors. As such, I meet regularly with members of the Survivor Working Group, and that group is very well represented on the board, and their voice is clearly heard. The staff who are working for us do a thorough job, amongst other things, rehearsing in depth redress schemes, not just nationally, but globally, learning lessons, giving us as a board clear recommendations for us to discuss and decide whether or not we will follow. One of the features of the scheme is that we have discussed subsidiarity. We are very clear that responsibility needs to be taken by appropriate bodies. Saying that the church commissioners will be the payers of first resort when other bodies may be legally responsible is not, I think, in itself responsible. But it is simply not the case that in any way are we designing a scheme which will delay people receiving redress. Just as insurance companies behind the scenes work out how payments will be made, so this scheme will do likewise. We will not pass survivors from pillar to post. I simply want to say to this synod that we are doing all that we can to produce as robust a scheme as we can in as timely a manner as we can. Thank you.
Penny Allen, and then I'm going to be testing the mind of Synod for closure of this debate. Penny.
Thank you. Penny Allen, Lichfield 335. As a retired teacher, you would and someone who has been disclosed to, children aged 9 to 13 who have been stabbed, beaten with brooms, thrown through a glass front door, suffered sexual abuse. I'm very conscious that the church is not always good at looking for damage in young people, and it needs to be more vigilant, and I hope the training will really help with that. I'm looking as well at the anxiety being expressed by the survivors about the all-faith group which they would like to have as an agency for looking after them. I'm looking at 14322 on page 5. The survivors are expressing their lack of confidence in the Church of England and the Church of Wales in this report, and the absence of this overarching national government body is certainly going to delay the way in which we can cope with this anxiety. And I'm hoping that the liaison that is appropriate with the other faith bodies is active and taking place at the moment. And I think it's very critical to the confidence of the survivors that this becomes active as soon as possible. And I would really welcome a comment, really, about this, in the sense that if there is an update in timings, in the way in which we are organising as faith bodies together, and the way in which that improves the confidence of the survivors in the Church of England, we shall be seriously concerned to see this expedited. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to propose that we now end this debate, and so I put it to you, Synod. All those in favour of the closure of this debate, please indicate. Thank you. And those against? That is clearly carried. I therefore call on the Bishop of Rochester to respond to the debate. And Bishop, you have up to 5 minutes.
Chair, thank you very much indeed, and thank you to everybody who's contributed to the debate. I'll do my best to respond. Thank you to His Grace the Archbishop for his kind words to me, to Alex, in support of our work. I take those as thanks to everybody involved in the team, members of the NST and the NSSG. Thank you to Mark for his questions and challenges. I do think this, Bishop Philip has responded to some of those questions. I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding going on here. With regard to the timescale, Philip has spoken to that. The timescale for the production of the scheme, since Philip took over, since the board was set up, has not slipped. We're sticking to that. I was making a point in my speech. I would urge Synod to push to get the scheme operational while we work out some of those other issues around subsidiarity. That's about bodies taking responsibility at the appropriate level. Just to be clear, the scheme will be a one-stop shop for survivors. They will not be passed from pillar to post, as Philip said. So I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding going on there. It is about, going forward, about different bodies taking responsibility, taking seriously the safeguarding work that needs to go on, and that needs to apply in parishes. But Mark, come and talk to Philip if you want to know a little bit more. I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding going on there. Thank you to Peter Adams. Yes, indeed, the move, we passed amending Canon 42 today, DSAs to DSOs, process to bring that in, creating at the diocesan level a new culture, a good dynamic working relationships. Absolutely, that's at the heart of the recommendation of introducing quality assurance and professional supervision of diocesan safeguarding teams to ensure that there's the same quality of work going across our 42 dioceses and cathedrals. So thank you for that. That's at the heart of the recommendation. Thank you to Clive Bitterness for that very specific suggestion with regard to the external validation of the regional model. I had a brief word with William, who was next to me at that point, and we think that's a suggestion we'd like to explore further, so do come back to us. James Carey, thank you very much indeed for your endorsement, in particular the one of do the training. I'm still dealing at the moment, I won't go into details, but with a certain retired priest who thinks it's not necessary for them to undertake safeguarding training in order to carry on with their valued PTO ministry. No. Thank you for that endorsement. Bishop Philip, I won't refer to what you've said. I've already done that. Penny, thank you very much indeed. I'm not quite sure I got exactly what you were talking about, so please do come back and talk to us. What I can say, I referred to this in questions the other day, is the NSD's commitment to developing a national strategy for survivor engagement. That's multifaceted. It's a hugely important part of the work. Again, do come and bring your particular questions and concerns back to us. It might be helpful for you to talk to those who are particularly involved in survivor engagement. Thank you, everybody, for your contribution. Thank you for your kind words as well. I do appreciate that. Again, I would continue to urge your full support for my esteemed colleague, Bishop Joanne, who's going to be taking over from me in just a few weeks' time, and for the whole team. I would urge you warmly, please, to take note of this report, and most importantly, take note of it, take it away, and make sure we're acting on it out in our parishes and dioceses. Thank you very much indeed.
I therefore put item 14, that the Synod do take note of this report, to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. All those against, please show. That is clearly carried. Thank you. We now move to the next item of business, insurance premium tax.
Before we start this item, the Secretary-General has a word to say.
Thank you, Debbie. Members of Synod, I want to say a brief word to reply to the point of order made earlier by Amanda Robbie about the appearance of a rainbow flag image on the live stream of the Synod on YouTube at the end of item 11 on Living in Love and Faith. Thank you to Amanda and others who have raised this with me. As Archbishop Justin said earlier, an investigation is underway into how this happened, but a full investigation will take a little while. I'm assured by the excellent audiovisual team from the Corporation of Church House who run the live stream that this was not a deliberate act by any member of staff. However, the only way to investigate fully what might have happened requires that the system be switched off and analysed, and you'll appreciate that we can't switch the system off this afternoon. Staff in the AV team and the corporation are horrified that this has happened. They join me in apologising for this incident. I commit to publishing the results of this investigation as soon as possible. Thank you.
We now come to item 15, insurance premium tax. For this item, members will need GS 2265A and GS 2265B and Notice Paper 5, the financial memo, as this item has a financial impact. I invite Gavin Kirk to speak to item 15. He has up to 10 minutes.
Members of Synod, it's my privilege to introduce this diocesan synod motion, which began life in the deanery of Lafford in the Diocese of Lincoln in 2018. Lafford Deanery is concerned that some parishes don't insure their church buildings adequately due to the ever-increasing cost of premiums. The Diocese of Lincoln is unusually blessed with 615 church buildings. Those who are active in the Twitter sphere may know that 41% of these are Grade 1 listed. Indeed, only 8% of our churches are unlisted. Many of these wonderful historic buildings are in remote rural villages where they may be the only community asset left. The pub, the village shop, and the post office having disappeared years ago. Some enterprising churches have partnered with local charities and amenities in the service of their communities, with these bodies operating out of part of the church building. We even have one church where the incumbent is vicar and licensee. Is that, I wonder, a fresh expression? Now, the upkeep of these mainly listed buildings places huge financial burdens on PCCs, who struggle to maintain the ministry and mission of the church, as well as the fabric and the grounds of these amazing public treasures. Like many dioceses, a disturbing number of our church buildings have been subject to lead thefts, vandalism, and arson, all of which result in insurance premiums increasing, often quite substantially. One of the churches in Lafford Deanery had the lead of its north aisle roof stolen by one of the roving gangs of thieves whose efficiency is matched only by their seeming ability to disappear into thin air once their crime is committed. The PCC was fully insured and was able to recoup all the costs involved in the repair and restoration. A church in the neighbouring deanery of Horncastle was not so fortunate. Its tower collapsed in January 2020, causing catastrophic damage to the building, though nobody was injured. It did not have appropriate insurance cover, and the PCC was only able to claim the cost of the scaffolding to hold the rest of the building up. Our PCCs are trustees and custodians of these often ancient and always deeply significant public buildings. They're governed not just by ecclesiastical, but also by charity law. So they're required to use their best efforts to fulfill the responsibilities of their office, and that includes taking out appropriate insurance. And between them, the PCCs of this country are responsible for no less than 45% of our nation's Grade 1 listed buildings. We would all want to affirm that the Church is the body of those who belong to Christ rather than the building in which that body meets. Many of our PCCs are faced with the wretched choice, for example, between whether to pay their latest insurance premium, often their largest annual expense, or to contribute to the common fund or parish share. They are often tempted to select a lower premium and only insure for making a site safe. So if the awful day comes and their church building is significantly damaged but not destroyed, they are left responsible for the remains of a building which has survived but now requires huge amounts of money to make it usable. Lincoln Diocese is not seeking to benefit simply the parish churches of the land by this motion. Rather, we hope that the government might be lobbied to exempt all charities from IPT. Insurance premium tax, as the Secretary-General has helpfully reminded us, has been around for nearly 30 years, having been introduced in 1994. Over the last few years, it has doubled to 12%, and has been estimated to cost the Church of England £5 million per year. If the government were to relieve all those in the charitable sector from the burden of this tax, it would be acting consistently with its long-stated understanding that commercial organisations and charities ought to be treated differently in such matters, as is already the case with income and corporation taxes and gift aid provision. Members of Synod, this motion won't be a significant step forward in the evangelisation of our nation, nor will it aid the plight of the oppressed and the refugee in our world. But if we pass this, as I hope we shall, it will give encouragement and relief to the many charities who seek in a time of uncertainty and financial difficulty to direct all their available resources to the objects for which they exist, without the added burden of a tax on their much-needed insurance. I beg to move this motion from the Diocese of Lincoln, standing in my name.
Thank you. This item is now open for debate. The speech limit is 5 minutes, and I call the gentleman standing there.
Gavin Drake, Sutherland, Nottingham 421. I support this motion because Gavins must stand together. And I had concerns when I first read the motion because of its reference to churches, and I appreciate from the notes that were provided that discussions and negotiations took place within the diocese to widen it from listed buildings, listed places of worship, to charities in general. I had the same concern that the Chief Executive, William Nye, expressed in his final paragraph of his notes on the motion, that we have to be careful that we don't seem to be doing special pleading for churches. We're here to speak for the churches, that's why we're here, but we're also here to speak for society. I want to widen this to the impact on other charities. I'm in contact with a number of rape and sexual assault referral centres and rape crisis type organisations, and they scrabble around for funds, and it's almost become a full-time job A few years ago, the government changed the funding model that they provided to make it a 3-year model instead of a 1-year model, so they could spend more time caring for victims than trying to find money to do the work. But since then, it's gone into the police and crime commissioners, police authorities. Some of them sent it to the police forces, and they're all under contract, and it's a lot of work. Insurance premium tax is only a small part of the expenditure of some of these charities. But when you're a small charity, a very small part is actually a very large part. So I support the motion. I want ask the Synod to support the motion. But in talking this forward, please talk about the impact it will have on all charities, not just churches and listed places of worship. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Greenwood, please.
Adrian Greenwood, Southwark 415. Thank you for calling me Chair. I too want to share with you the experience of being a trustee of a non-church charity. For a number of years now, in fact it's 50 since I arrived in Bermondsey, I've been associated with what's called the Cambridge University Mission, now the Salmon Youth Centre in Bermondsey. In 2010 it was rebuilt to become at the time the largest purpose-built Christian youth centre in the country. Something for which I can take no credit whatsoever. And we've carried on providing youth work during the years of austerity. In 2020, it became clear that the second phase of our brand new building, which had been procured for us by a housing association partner developer, a housing association, I hasten to add, which from its public website has liquid assets of £800 million, that the second phase of the building was covered in combustible cladding. Our insurance premium as a charity rose from £12,000 per annum to £180,000 per annum, and in the following year, the year we're currently in, it's gone up to over 200,000. We are responsible for raising that amount of money, and the Partner Housing Association, so far, I live in hope and pray in hope, has declined to increase the proportion which it feels required to pay. It's paying the proportion that under the lease it believes it's required to pay, but still leaves us with a very large gap. So we're a small charity, our turnover is £800,000 a year. We still have to raise all of that every year. But you can imagine, it's just been awful, absolutely awful. So this motion for me isn't just about insurance premiums tax, it's also about the insurance industry and what they're doing about these massive increases for charities like my own. Now, our insurer, or our principal insurer, they've split it, is the Ecclesiastical Insurance Office. And I'm very, very grateful indeed to the support that Bishop Christopher has given in person to meeting with them to try and alleviate the position that we've been in. Yes, it is much more than church buildings. There are loads of charities, and I suspect there are quite a few churches who are involved in these partnership arrangements with housing associations and other developers where this situation has occurred. Yes, let's support this motion, but let's understand that it's a far wider issue. It's an issue which affects the insurance company business, the insurance world, and frankly, the health and well-being of trustees like myself who've had to live through this for 2.5 years. Now, there is a silver lining. Last November, after 2.25 years of working through this issue, thanks to His Majesty's government, we did receive the offer of a grant of £5.8 million for the removal and replacement of the cladding. Fantastic, and I'm hoping we'll be on site in April and I might be in a slightly more cheerful disposition this time next year when it's mostly removed. But that hasn't relieved us of the obligation to find £200,000 a year insurance premium. It's a mega issue. So please, let's do what we can to approach not only the specific issue of insurance premium tax, but of also the wider issue of how these completely unforeseen, unforeseeable events covered through insurance are addressed in our common society. Thank you very much indeed for bearing with me.
Thank you. The speech limit has now been reduced to 3 minutes. I call on Alison, then John Spence, then Lucy Doherty. Thank you.
Alison Coulter, Winchester 428. Thank you very much indeed, Gavin, for bringing this to us. When I wasn't planning to speak, I wasn't even very interested in this. I didn't really see why it was important. But I've really had my eyes opened. And thank you so much to Lafford Deanery, because it must seem a bit disheartening. It must take ages and ages to get it through Diocesan Synod, the whole process. And here we are eventually. And I really hope we will accept this motion, although the wording does need to be changed to His Majesty's Government, as Adrian pointed out. And it just caused me to reflect that actually you said this might not make much difference, and I just would like to contest that. And one of my favourite parts, little verses in the Bible, is from hidden away in Zechariah. It says, "Do not despise the day of the small thing." And I think this might make a really big difference to churches and church communities trying to do this. In Winchester, we have had a fire in one of our parishes in Ropley. I know that many of you will have experienced that, and we saw the horrific pictures recently of the church in London diocese. And so this it can be a really traumatic event, and we do need to make sure our churches are properly insured. Sadly, Ropley Church wasn't properly insured, and that has come back to us as a Diocesan Board of Finance to try and work out the best thing to do. So this is a really important thing to be doing as our very last piece of business, and I just want to say a big thank you, and I hope that we will all vote in favour of this. Thank you.
John Spence, then Lucy Doherty.
John Spence, Archbishop's Council 467, and I'm very grateful to Lincoln Diocese for bringing this issue forward. I would just say, and this may sound harsh to Gavin, number one, any PCC that thinks that they shouldn't have the appropriate insurance to save 12% insurance premium tax needs to think very hard. We must never ever compromise on what is the right amount of insurance. There are cases where churches quite deliberately don't insure at rebuilding cost because they recognise that if something catastrophic was to happen, they might need a different solution. That is a big decision, and I would never commend it. I merely note that it happens. I have no intention, Chair, of speaking against this motion. I note it. I think the first thing that I might be saying to the officers in MPA is we maybe ought to reach out to ACIVO, the Association of Chief Executives of Voluntary Organisations, to see what appetite they would have. I don't think we can assume that charities would put this on the top of their lobbying list, so let's check what the sector-wide appetite is. But I think for me, what it reminds us is of that elephant in the room of which we've heard several elephants this afternoon. The whole question of the fact, Gavin, what marks us out from other charities is that we have 45% of the Grade 1 listed buildings in this country. And at some point, we need to think long and hard about how we engage together as to what we think the long-term solution should be for those buildings for which we may no longer have a need over time. As Gavin number 2 maybe reminds us, well, it was number 1. I get confused, but the church is not the building. The church is the human worshipping organisation. And it may well be that we have wonderful Grade 1 churches which are no longer in the most appropriate place or can no longer serve the best interests of taking forward the kingdom of God. So in accepting this motion, could I urge Synod to keep in mind the need at some point to think about what is the outcome we would like to ensure or achieve in terms of the upkeep of that wonderful heritage that we own for this country. Thank you.
Lucy Doherty, then Mary Durlacher. Thank you.
Portsmouth 385. Thank you very much for bringing this motion, Gavin. I will be very pleased to support it. And responding just to John Spence, I'd like to add not just grade 1 listed buildings, but if you have a church which is grade 2 star or even only grade 2, you are still subject to all sorts of extra penalties. And I will be very glad to be able to take back to my PCC treasurer some good news about finances for her. But I have a simple question to ask, and it's maybe very naive, and I may have missed something. We're talking about churches. I just wondered, are our cathedrals included in that? Now, I know there are some cathedrals which may have a lot of money, but some don't. And it's always an extra burden trying to find tax for anything. And I just want to ask the question, does this include our cathedrals, or are they exempt because they come under all sorts of different legal provisions which better or informed people than me could answer? Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Durlacher. Thanks. And then I see no one else.
Mary Durlacher, Chelmsford 272. Could I add to the list of real concerns for PCCs the issue of subsidence, which is not covered by most insurance schemes, EIG, and particularly in my part of the world, which is built on Essex clay. We've had an exponential rise in claims, but they're not covered. And I know we sing hymns about shifting sands. We can't see these lovely grade 1 buildings affected with no help at all. So anything that you could do to help would be hugely appreciated.
I see no one else standing, so I call on Gavin Kirk to respond, please. He has up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, sisters and brothers in the Synod. It's marvellous to be standing here not having to reply to anyone who's been negative. So thank you to Mr. Drake. Yes, we are indeed wanting all charities to be exempted, and that was a change that was introduced at a very early stage in this process. You're right, IPT is small, but it is significant, as it would be nice to be able to say of your present interlocutor, but I'm not so sure. Mr. Greenwood, thank you for sharing your experience from the Youth Centre in Bermondsey. I'm afraid that sort of rise in insurance premium is sadly not unique. And we take your questions about the insurance industry as being very pertinent. They do lie outside the scope of this diocesan synod motion, but perhaps members of synod as individuals, we could undertake to do what we can about challenging these. To the Vice Chair of the House of Laity, do not despise the day of the small thing. Thank you very much indeed for that. We think it is small, but could be significant. You're quite right about the fact that it is now His Majesty, but when the Synod, a diocesan synod passed it, it was Her Majesty, and I don't think you can read that backwards, can you? Canon Spence, as always, offers very sound advice, and I would want to echo what he says about adequate levels of insurance. But as I tried to point out, some parishes face the choice between that and whether or not to pay for the mission and ministry they receive. So this motion is designed to help them out of that impasse. What outcome do we want is something that perhaps could form a debate in this synod later on in this quinquennium. To Lucy Doherty, we'd want to say that we would most certainly want to include cathedrals in that. We don't believe they're currently exempt, and we think they should be. And I'm afraid, Mrs. Dolac, I didn't catch everything you said. I am getting old. My hearing isn't what it was. So if you would care to catch me or send me an email, I'll make sure to include that in what I report back to Lincoln Diocesan Synod. It's thrilling for us that our Diocesan Synod motion has received such positive support here, and I commend it to you with our thanks.
Thank you. We now put item 15 to the vote. All in favour, please show. Thank you. All against, please show. That is clearly carried, and that concludes this item of business, and we move to the prorogation. Thank you.
Sorry not to be a bit quicker. I was just preparing myself for the counted vote by houses. For the prorogation, I don't know. Just before I read this, I have to say I do think providence is a very strange thing, and we need more theology on it. In the name of God, Amen. We, Justin Portal, by divine providence, Archbishop of Canterbury, do now prorogue this synod to and until the 7th day of July 2023, subject to the powers exercisable by the presidents under the Constitution and the standing orders of the synod. If you're comfortable to do so, please stand for the blessing. As we go from here, the first delegates for the ACC in Accra are gathering. Some stories already going around the communion about what we've done today. So I shall begin with a prayer for that and then the blessing for us here. For we are one body. In the one Spirit we were all baptized into one body. Let us, therefore, do those things which promote the peace of the body. We pray for the ACC, for Archbishop Paul Kwong, and for Maggie as they chair various sessions, for the election of the new President and Chair and Vice Chair. We pray for delegates for safe travel. And we pray for your Spirit to bring unity and peace. We continue to pray for the situation in Turkey and Syria, with now nearly 20,000 casualties. We pray for those who mourn, those who hope, and those who despair. And so in a world of war, terror and disaster, Lord Jesus, spread your peace. Give us generosity. Overthrow the powerful who kill and raise up and protect the weak. And may the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be amongst you and remain with you now and always. Amen. Well, us off then.